لا إله إلا الله محمد رسول الله.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين سيدنا ونبينا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Ahlan wa sahlan wa marhaban bikum. Welcome you back to our Level 1 Shafi'i fiqh course on the essentials of Shafi'i law, Imam al-Hadrami's Safinat Al-Naja, covering ibadat or worship from a Shafi'i primer. In this lesson, we continue with our discussion on fasting, looking at make-up fasts and expiations, fasting nullifiers and make-up missed or making up missed fasts. Our course outcomes: an introduction to Islamic law, first step into the legacy of the Shafi'i school, and learn the 5 pillars of Islam at a beginner level. In this lesson, we look at making up fast, what nullifies fasts, and breaking the fast in the month of Ramadan. Now, previously, I think I mentioned that the course ends in the section before fasting starts. That was a mistake. The course actually ends, or rather the book actually ends after this lesson. You'll see the ending of the author, the official ending, and then others have added the additional segment of Hajj and Umrah, which we will cover this time around. We didn't cover it previously, but the book officially ends in this lesson بإذن ta'ala. So with that, قال المصنف رحمه الله تعالى ونفعنا الله بعلومه وعلومكم آمين. فصل فيما يوجب القضاء والكفارة, regarding what necessitates the qada, a make-up fast, and kafara, and expiation. Now there's a very specific intention behind the phrase kafara here. Qada, we understand. Qada applies to many acts of worship wherever there is a specified time and the act of worship is not performed in that specified time and it's performed after that time, you refer to that as qada, or a make-up. Then with regards to kafara, right? Kafara means an expiation. And there are various types of kafarat, right? Kaffara yukaffiru means to wipe something away, to cover it. So for an expiation in ibadah, it usually means that one broke a certain law, or you broke an ideal for which you need to make up for through an expiation, something, a penalty that would wipe away whatever was done or whatever was lacking. So that is what we are discussing here. For fasting, generally speaking, either one needs to make up the day only, or make up the day and pay a fidya, which is often translated as a ransom, a penalty, but that's the second point. And then the third point is where there's a major expiation required, where not only must the day be fasted, not only is there a penalty, but there is a massive penalty, and we'll discuss that in this lesson بإذن الله تعالى. قال المصنف رحمه الله ويجب مع القضاء للصوم الكفارة العظمى والتعزير على من أفسد صومه في رمضان يوما كاملا بجماع تام آثم به للصوم. ويجب, it is compulsory, مع القضاء, along with making up the day, للصوم, for fasting, in other words for breaking a fast, الكفارة, an expiation, but specifically العظمى, the major form of expiation, along with والتعزير, punitive disciplinary measures, corporal disciplinary measures. For who? For whom does this apply? على من, specifically for the person who أفسد صومه, they had corrupted, they had spoiled, they had broken their fast, في Ramadan, during the day in Ramadan, يوما كاملا, so they've broken an entire day of fasting, بجماع, with sexual intimacy, جماع تام آثم, that is of course sinful, للصوم, within the fasting day. So the kafara in the Shafi'i school, the major penalty, applies only to breaking the fast with sexual intimacy that is done deliberately, knowingly, and mindfully of the fact that it is fast. So the major kafara and specified punishment are compulsory, together with making up the fast for he who breaks his fast of Ramadan a complete day by having complete intercourse, in which he becomes a sinner in his fast. Now, the legal occasion of the offense is that day of fasting, so that if it were committed on 2 separate days, then 2 separate penalties would become applicable. Though if it were committed twice in one day, right, the same day, then only one expiation is required. Now, the expiation here, what we mean when we say the major expiation, right, the major kafara, it's major because it requires that one either frees a slave. Now, of course, we know that contemporaneously there are no slaves. So the first possibility of making up is already out of the question. So freeing a slave. If not possible, then to fast for 2 consecutive months, 2 consecutive lunar months with no breaks in between. That's what consecutive means. And then if that is not possible, so the person is unable to endure that, or for some reason they are unable to fast for 60 days consecutively, not for health reasons, but for some other circumstances, then they have the third option, or I shouldn't say the third option, but then they go to the third recourse, because it has to be followed in this order. They can then feed 60 poor persons, 60 underprivileged people, with a fidya each, which is essentially about 750 grams or so of the staple food. Some more conservative measurements is at around 500 grams, but I believe 750 grams to be safer and more accurate, which is essentially a fidya, and they would need to give one such fidya, which consists of a basic staple meal for 60 underprivileged people. And if one is unable to do this, the expiation remains on that person's responsibility in their dhimma until they are able to fulfill that expiation. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. Now, this applies to the male, the husband who pursues sexual intimacy with his wife. But if his wife does so unwillingly, meaning she didn't actually want to participate, she was compelled into it, then the woman, the wife in this case, does not need to make up the day. Though if they were equally guilty in initiating and participating in the act, then both parties would need to have the expiation. Now, it's important to reiterate that this is only applicable for somebody who breaks their fast with sexual intercourse in the manner that is described. That's in the Shafi'i school. Other opinions in other schools of thought would apply this kafara to any deliberate breaking of the fast. This does not happen in the Shafi'i school. If somebody deliberately breaks their fast in a way other than sexual intimacy in the manner described, then they would still be sinful. They would still have to make up for that day, but there would be no kafara in the way that is described here, and there would be no fidya as well. Wallahu subhanahu wa ta'ala a'lam. Tamam. We proceed inshaAllah ta'ala to the next segment. ما يوجب القضاء والإمساك ما يوجب القضاء والإمساك ويجب مع القضاء. It is wajib, it is necessary, along with expiation, along with making up the day, والإمساك, and abstaining للصوم for the sake of fasting في ستة مواضع, in 6 places. There's a to translate this, I think it's just best I show you the translation. What necessitates making up the fast and the major expiation? We've dealt with the first segment of that already. There are 6 situations in which it is compulsory to abstain from things that break the fast, and wajib to fast the remainder of the day, and also necessitate making up that fast later. That's the point that we're dealing with here. There are 6 situations in which it is compulsory to abstain from things that break the fast, meaning you're not fasting, but you're abstaining from the things that break the fast, meaning that it is wajib to fast for the remainder of the day. That day is not a valid fast because of some reason, but still you must abstain from those things. And in addition to that, you should also make up for that fast later on because it wasn't a valid fasting day. So that should be clear. We are dealing with ما يوجب القضاء والإمساك. One has to make up that day and also refrain from breaking the fast further on that particular day. ويجب مع القضاء. Along with making up the day, it is wajib to al-imsak, to abstain from things that break the fast. للصوم, out of reverence for the fasting, في ستة مواضع, within 6 specific occasions. الأول, the first, في رمضان, is in relation to the month of Ramadan, لا في غيره, not anywhere else, على متعد بفطره, upon a person who transgresses by breaking their fast. So in the month of Ramadan, somebody transgresses, they break the law of Allah and they deliberately break the fast. Not in the way that we've described with intimacy, but in any other way. Drinking, eating, smoking, something that breaks the fast. So for that person, they perhaps gain consciousness and make tawbah on that day. They cannot now say, well, okay, I broke my fast already. I'm going to have to make up for this day already, so I might as well continue eating for the rest of the day. No, they have to not fast. They have to not eat, not drink, don't do anything that breaks the fast for the rest of the day, even though it's not a valid day. And they have to make up that day later, right? والثاني, the second situation, على تارك النية ليلا في الفرض. The person who omitted the intention the night before an obligatory fast. Now remember, we said not the verbalization of the intention, but they were completely unconscious about the fact that the next day is fasting. I can think of a few examples of this. The first example is somebody who was unaware that the end of Sha'ban is upon them, and they go to sleep that night, not knowing that they'll wake up the next day and it will be Ramadan. So the night before, they could not have had an intention. They were not aware. They were not conscious at all of the fact that it is going to be Ramadan. So that would not be a valid intention. Another situation is a person who is so preoccupied one night during Ramadan with work, or perhaps they are a medical doctor and they're busy with surgery or something of the sort, to the point where it occupies them for the entire night. Dawn reaches them and they were so oblivious to the fact that the next day is fasting, they didn't even think about it. So they could not have had acute consciousness of purpose in that situation either. So, tamam, that person would also have to fast for that day, even though it's not a valid fast because they didn't have a niyyah. So they've abstained completely from everything, eating, drinking, intimacy, all the things that break the fast. Yet, it's not a valid fast, so they would have to make up the day at another time, but still they cannot eat on that day, and Allah knows best. The third situation is على من تسحر ظانا بقاء الليل فبان خلافه. A person who wakes up for suhoor ظانا بقاء الليل, thinking that it's still nighttime, that dawn has not yet broken, it's not yet fajr, so they're eating, only to realize later, فبان, it becomes clear, خلافه, that it wasn't still nighttime, it was actually Fajr already. They're 8, 5, 10, 15 minutes after true dawn had already arrived. So when they realize that, now human nature may say, well, I didn't know, so therefore my fasting is valid. That would be incorrect. You did know when you knew, meaning when it became clear that you were eating during the day of Ramadan. So even though it was technically not sinful, still it wasn't a valid fast. So you would have to abstain for the rest of that day from doing anything that would normally break the fast. And you would have to make up for that day later on, and Allah knows best. Number 4, والرابع على من أفطر ظانا الغروب فبان خلافه أيضا. A similar situation, but now we're dealing with Maghrib. A person who's fasting, thinking that Maghrib had entered, then they eat, but then they realize afterwards that it wasn't actually Maghrib's adhan that they heard, it was some other sound. And Maghrib's adhan only happened 5 minutes later. In that case, again, this person is not sinful because it was a genuine mistake. But they discovered that they were eating during the day in Ramadan, therefore they would have to make up for that day later. But let's say this happens 30 minutes before the actual waqt of Maghrib enters. So the person mistakenly thinks that it's Maghrib already. They eat, therefore their fast is broken. So now they can think, well, I've broken my fast already. I might as well continue eating because I'm going to have to make up this day anyways. No, they're not allowed to do that. They still have to refrain from those things that would normally break the fast and still make up the day later. Right? Number 5. والخامس على من بان له يوم 30 من شعبان أنه من رمضان. This is the person it becomes clear to him on the day of the 30th of Sha'ban, right? أنه من Ramadan, that in fact it's not the 30th of Sha'ban, it is in fact the month of Ramadan. Let's say news of the sighting of the moon only reached him on that day, or information that Ramadan has been established only reaches him while he's not fasting, thinking that it's the 30th day of Sha'ban. Once he discovers, he stops engaging in anything that would normally break the fast. But of course, he's not fasting. He had no niyyah. He probably ate and drank. So he would have to make up for that day later as well. And then finally, على من سبقه ماء المبالغة من مضمضة واستنشاق. This is for a person who was excessive in their usage of, mubalagha means excessive. So they were excessive in their usage of min madmadatin, rinsing the mouth, wastinshaqin, and rinsing or sniffing out the nose, cleaning out the nose with water. So in the Shafi'i school, it's generally recommended to use copious amounts or efficient amounts of water for wudu, for the gargling and the cleansing of one's nose. Relatively speaking, of course, within the parameters of 750 milliliters approximately for the entire wudu, right? However, for the fasting person, it is recommended not to be excessive in gargling the mouth and cleaning the nose. And the reason for that is that if one is excessive and water accidentally slips down, that would break one's fast because you were excessive, right? And therefore, you would need to make up that day. If, however, you use the moderate amount of water for the rinsing of the mouth and the nose, and still accidentally water slips through, then you would not have to make up that day because you were not excessive. So the excessive nature of how you perform these acts of worship would determine whether an accident is going to be penalized or whether it is not going to be penalized. Wallahu subhanahu wa ta'ala a'lam. Some extra points. If a person who is intoxicated from the night until the morning of Ramadan, they completely unaware, unfamiliar, what's happening, right? And they just wake up, oh, it's Ramadan. That's another example of somebody who could not have had a niyyah. Another point that comes up here is that it is best to hasten breaking the fast when one is certain that the sun has set. The sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is, and there's of course many sunnah in relation to fasting, we don't deal with all of them here, but the sunnah is that one should delay suhoor till the latest possible time without putting oneself at risk of going into Fajr, and one should hasten iftar by breaking the fast as soon as it is established that Maghrib's waqt had entered. This is the sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ that he strongly emphasized, to the degree that he said the ummah will continue to be on goodness for as long as they hasten in breaking the fast. And there's a lot that we can learn from that, a lot of wisdom we can extract from that, but that would be the sunnah in this regard. And then the final point is to be careful with regards to the gargling of the mouth and the rinsing of the nose, especially when one is fasting. Outside of fasting situations, you can do so normally, but in fasting situations, you should be moderate and more careful, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. We proceed. Faslun fi ma yubtilu as-sawm. Now, this is probably the most important discussion for a student who learns about fasting for the first time, because fasting is a very straightforward act of worship. It's the absence of doing, right? Fasting is, in fact, literally, it means to abstain. So fasting is not something that you do, it's technically something that you abstain from, and your non-action is considered action. So to ensure that you've abstained correctly, you need to, of course, understand what would break the fast. So that's what we deal with here. Fima yubtilu sawm. What breaks the fast? Yabtilu sawmu biriddatin. Fasting is broken through apostasy, wa haydin, menstruation, wa nifasin, postpartum or postnatal bleeding, or wiladatin, childbirth, wa jununin, insanity, walau lahdatan, even if it is for a moment. If somebody loses consciousness, and not falling asleep, but they lose their consciousness, they faint or they lose their mind for a moment, even if it's a moment, that would break the fast. وَبِإِغْمَاءٍ, to be completely unconscious, to be completely out of it for the entire day of Ramadan, without waking up even for a moment. وَسُكْرٍ تَعَدَّى بِهِ, and intoxication that is done in a transgressive way. In other words, it's not intoxication due to medicinal reasons or any form of legitimate medicine, but rather intoxication as a result of negligence and transgression. In amma jami' an-nahar, and both the unconscious factor as well as the intoxication factor is going to apply when it covers the entire day of fasting. Tamam. So let's look at this in some detail. Fasting is nullified with apostasy, menstruation, postnatal bleeding, childbirth, insanity even for a moment, unconsciousness, and unlawful intoxicants if they last for the entire day. We move on, inshallah ta'ala. Al-iftaru fi Ramadan arba'atu anwa'. Now, breaking the fast is divided further into 4 types. There's 4 scenarios or situations in which one may need to break the fast. Wajibun, where it is compulsory to break one's fast. Kama fil ha'id wan nufasa, as in the case of a lady experiencing hayd or nifas. And this is actually a very critical point to highlight to our sisters, that it is wajib, right? They are fulfilling an obligation by not fasting in Ramadan when they experience the hayd or the nifas. Why am I saying this? Because I find that many sisters become despondent in Ramadan, especially when their hayd lasts longer than average, that they are in a situation where they cannot make salah or read Quran or attend Taraweeh, and they cannot fast, so they feel deprived in that month of Ramadan, and naturally that can be understandable. However, the idea in the disappointment is that they are not engaging in ibadah, but the abstinence from fasting is in fact a form of ibadah, and it is a fulfillment of an obligation as much as the fasting person is fulfilling an obligation as well, and Allah knows best. So that's the first situation wherein it is wajib to break the fast. The second one is where it is jaiz or permissible to break the fast. It's neither recommended nor is it disliked. Kama fil musafir wal marid, as in the case with a traveler, right? And an ill person. Now, there are, of course, specifics that we've mentioned. What type of illness, what type of travel, when is it better to fast, when is it better to not fast. So we've covered that already. Wala, meaning not wajib, nor jaiz. It's not compulsory to break the fast, nor is it permissible to break the fast in a sense. Kama fil majnoon, as in the case with a insane person. When you are insane, you can't refer to that as being compulsory. There's no way that you can control that. And you can't also, describe it as being jaiz. It's an involuntary action. And then fourth, muharram, where it is haram to break the fast. كَمَنْ أَخَّرَ قَضَاءَ رَمَضَانَ. Not haram to, it is haram to break the fast, not haram to fast, but haram to break the fast. كَمَنْ أَخَّرَ رَمَضَانَ or أَخَّرَ قَضَاءَ رَمَضَانَ, like the person who delays making up the missed fasting days from the month of Ramadan. مَا تَمَكُّنِهِ, while having had the opportunity and the ability to fulfill it. حَتَّى ضَاقَ الْوَقْتُ عَنْهُ, to the point where time is tight and they no longer have an option. So how does this work? Basically, when you miss a fasting day, it is wajib to make up for that day before the next Ramadan arrives. Now, there's no compulsion to make up that day immediately after Ramadan, though that is highly recommended. So let's say a person was negligent and they have a week, one full week, 7 days of make-up fasts to fulfill before the next Ramadan. But they only wake up 8 days before the next Ramadan. So now 8 days before the next Ramadan comes, 7 of those days they have to fast, right? So they can delay one more day, but then that 7 that remains, they have to fast. They cannot break their fast for those 7 days at all, because there's no flexibility any longer to delay it further. Wallahu subhanahu wa ta'ala a'lam. So let's look at this again. What breaks the fast? Number one, there's 4 conditions. So the first condition is where it's wajib to break the fast, like for the woman who experiences hayd and postnatal bleeding. Number 2, where it's permissible to break the fast, like a traveler or a sick person. Number 3, that which is neither wajib nor permissible. In fact, it is involuntary, like insanity. And number 4, where it is haram to break the fast, like the one who delays the making up of Ramadan despite having the capability to do so until the time does not permit. If somebody is making up their fasting day as an obligatory fast outside of the month of Ramadan, and there is enough time, right, to change it, can they break their fast? The preponderant view is that they should not break the fast. It is unlawful for them. But there are other views as well that allow them to break the fast, even though it's a compulsory fast, because they can make it up at another time. But that assumes that they have enough time remaining. Wallahu subhanahu wa ta'ala a'lam. We move on, inshallah. ما يترتب على الإفطار في رمضان. What is built upon breaking the fast in Ramadan? What consequences are there? وأقسام الإفطار أربعة أيضا. The categorization or the categories of breaking the fast are also 4. أولها, the first category, ما يلزم فيه القضاء والفدية, that which, you broke the fast, but it necessitates that you make up for the day and you pay a fidya. وهو اثنان, here are 2 situations. الأول الإفطار لخوف على غيره. Breaking the fast because you fear for someone else. ثاني الإفطار مع التأخير قضاء مع إمكانه حتى يأتي رمضان آخر. Breaking the fast along with delaying the makeup of that fast while it is possible until the next Ramadan arrives. Okay, so these are 2 sub-situations of point number 1. What is point number 1? Where you break the fast, but you now have to make up for that day and give a fidya. You have to make up for the day that you missed, and you have to pay the fidya, the staple meal of about 750 grams of food. Now, in this situation, right, there are 2 possibilities that are given. The first is you broke the fast because you have fear for the life of another. And the second is that you break the fast with the possibility of delaying your makeup with you being able to until the next Ramadan reaches. The second situation of breaking the fast, ما يلزم فيه القضاء دون الفدية. When you break the fast and you have to make up the fasting day, but you don't owe any fidya. وهو يكثر. There's a million, situations of this. كمغمى عليه, like the person who loses conscious, the person who breaks their fast because they fell ill, the person who breaks their fast even out of transgression. وثالثها, the third situation, ما يلزم فيه الفدية دون القضاء. You broke the fast, but now you owe a fidya. You don't have to make up the day. وهو شيخ كبير. This applies to an elderly person, a person with a chronic illness who is never able to fast again, etc. ورابعها, the fourth situation, لا ولا, meaning it does not necessitate a fidya. You don't have to pay ransom, nor does it necessitate qada. So there's no fidya, there's no qada. وهو المجنون. This applies to the person who loses sanity. الذي, the one who لم يتعدى بجنونه, who is not a transgressor in their insanity, meaning they did not induce insanity within themselves. They didn't bring it on by taking some form of narcotic or medication unlawfully. Right? The insanity was it was spontaneous, it happened naturally. So these are the 4 situations, right? Just to repeat, without getting into the details, breaking the fast and it necessitates making up as well as the fidya. Number 2, breaking the fast and it necessitates making up, not a fidya. Number 3, breaking the fast and it necessitates fidya but not make up. And number 4, it neither necessitates fidya nor make up fast. Right? Insanity. Tamam. So with that, let's look at the translation and some extra notes in this regard. The things that make qada and fidya wajib are 2. Breaking the fast due to the fear of harm for others, and breaking the fast and after that delaying to make it up until the next Ramadan comes. Now what is this referring to? One has to pay a fidya, which is again at minimum 509 grams of food, as you see in the footnote, or a safer estimate is about 750 grams or milliliters of food for each fasting day missed. And of course, making the day up means you fast an entire day in replacement of that day outside of Ramadan. What does it mean to break the fast due to the fear for harming others? Now, the specific situation mentioned here is the pregnant lady or the breastfeeding lady, right? There's no rule that if somebody is pregnant or breastfeeding that they don't fast or that they can't fast. They can fast like anybody else. But of course, being in the vulnerable state that they are in, or the sensitive state that they are in, or the delicate state, they have to assess for themselves. If they are not going to fast because they fear for their own health and their own well-being, the lady doesn't fast because she fears that her health cannot manage it while she's pregnant or breastfeeding, and she's not concerned about anybody else. She's not concerned about the child, right? She's concerned about herself. Or she's concerned about herself and part of her is also concerned about the child. In this case, she would have to make up for that fasting day, but she doesn't owe a fidya. If, however, a pregnant woman or a breastfeeding woman has no concern for her own safety, meaning she feels confident that she can fast and she will not be jeopardizing her own health. However, she fears for the well-being of the child. She fears that she may not be able to provide sufficient nutrients for the child or look after the child, etc. So she fears only for the child, not for herself. So she's breaking a fast as a result of a fear for another. And then that's exactly what you can see here, breaking the fast due to the fear of harm for others. If that is the case, where she only fears for the baby and not for herself, she would have to make up for that fasting day as well as give a fidya for each of those days, and Allah knows best. Then the second scenario, where somebody breaks the fast, but then they delay making up their fast. They delay and delay and delay, and lo and behold, the next Ramadan comes. The next Ramadan comes, they still didn't pay they still didn't make up for the missed days of the previous Ramadan. Now, when this Ramadan is over, not only do they have to make up for those days still, they also need to give a fidya for each of those days as a result of not making it up in time. And should this happen again, meaning they still don't make up those days, and they reach the following Ramadan, then they would still need to make up those days and in addition pay two penalties, two fidyas for each day that they need to make up. Right? So that's the rulings mentioned here in terms of the types of breaking the fast. And that is both part of the first category, those who need to pay the day in, meaning they need to make up for the day, and they must pay the fidya. Now we look at the second category again, those for which qada is compulsory, but they don't have to pay anything, like the person who is unconscious, right? A person who is forced, his fast will not break because he is not responsible for what he has been forced to. Okay, that's another thing. A person who is forced, but that's a separate issue here. Number 3, those for which fidya is compulsory. So they must pay the penalty, but they don't have to make up for the day. Now this is, if you think about it, it's somewhat obvious. An elderly person who is too weak and feeble to fast, their body can't handle it, or a person who has got a chronic illness, and because of the chronic illness, they will never be able to fast. So naturally, they can't make up for the day. There's no qada. But as a result of there being no qada, they pay fidya for every day in the month of Ramadan. And then number 3, this is obviously a very rare instance, but that which is neither wajib nor permissible because we don't have control over it, like the person who falls insane. And of course, they don't bring that insanity on themselves. Now we move on to the next section in which we deal with فيما يصل إلى الجوف ولا يفطر. Scenarios in which something reaches the inside of the body cavity, right? The internal body cavity. Now in the Shafi'i school, the principle is that anything that reaches the internal body cavity, whether that be the cavity of the upper torso or whether that be the cavity in the head, in the face area, if something reaches inside there through an open passageway deliberately, then that would break the fast. But there are situations in which something reaches the inside but it does not break the fast. So الذي لا يفطر مما يصل إلى الجوف سبعة أفراد. That which does not break the fast despite reaching the internal cavity are 7 individual items. Firstly, ما يصل إلى الجوف بنسيان. That which reaches the internal cavity out of forgetfulness. أو جهل, or out of ignorance, أو إكراه, or out of coercion, right? So somebody forces them to eat, or they push something into their body cavity. Then وبجريان ريق بما بين أسنانه وقد عجز عن مجه لعذره. The fourth item mentioned here is that spit, right, saliva, runs down from between the teeth, and it takes with them something, some item of food from between the teeth. وَقَدْ عَجَزَ عَنْ مَجِّهِ, and the person was incapable, they were unable to not swallow it. لِعُذْرِهِ, of course they would then be excused, right? So that would not break the fast because it was a pure accident of something that they couldn't control. وَمَا وَصَّلَ إِلَى الْجَوْفِ وَكَانَ غُبَارَ طَرِيقٍ. If you're walking in the road and there's dust in the road and you walk through the dust and you taste it and you actually feel yourself swallowing it, all of this is involuntary, that would not break the fast. وَمَا وَصَّلَ إِلَيْهِ وَكَانَ غَرْبَلَةَ دَقِيقٍ. What reaches the internal cavity, and it's the dust from flour. Again, the lady, the woman, the man, they're busy making bread, they have some flour, and their actions with the flour causes a dust cloud that can easily go into the cavity, but it wouldn't break the fast, unless of course it's done deliberately, intentionally. أو ذبابا طائرا أو نحوه, or a fly or mosquito or something of the like flies into one's mouth and down one's throat. Wallahu a'lamu bis-sawab, and Allah knows best. Looking at the translation of this, it's sort of a summarized translation. The things which by reaching the stomach still do not break the fast, there are 7. So number 1 to 3, that which reaches the body cavity out of forgetfulness, ignorance, or force. Number 4, the mixing of saliva with what is between the teeth, and he cannot discharge it, he is therefore excused. Number 5, the dust of the road which reaches to the body cavity. Number 6 and 7, the dust of sifted flour or flies, etc., which reaches the body cavity. This is the end paragraph from the kitab itself, Imam al-Hadrami's text. He says, rahimahullah ta'ala, نسأل الله الكريم بجاه نبيه الوسيم أن يخرجني من الدنيا مسلما ووالدي وأحبائي ومن إلي انتمى وأن يغفر لي ولهم مقحمات ولماما. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد ابن عبد الله ابن عبد المطلب ابن هاشم ابن عبد مناف رسول الله إلى كافة الخلق رسول الملاحم حبيب الله الفاتح الخاتم وآله وصحبه أجمعين والحمد لله رب العالمين. He says, I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the most generous, through the honor of his Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa ala alihi wa sallam, to take me from this world in the state of being a Muslim, and my parents and my loved ones, and all of those who attribute themselves to me or they attach themselves to me, and that he forgives me and them from all of our mistakes, mistakes, slip-ups, sins. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad, and salutations upon our Master Muhammad, the son of Abdullah, the son of Abdul Muttalib, the son of Hashim, the son of Abdul Manaf, the messenger of Allah to all of creation, the messenger of the creation, Habibillah al-Fatih al-Khatim, the beloved of Allah, the opener, the conqueror, the seal, and upon his family and upon his companions, all of them. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, and all praise is to Allah, the Rabb of all of the worlds. So to summarize what we've covered here in this dars, we've covered the concept of making up fasts, what nullifies fasts, and breaking the fast in Ramadan. As a question for you to think about, and of course this is just a prelude to what comes in the quiz for each lesson, would an invasive vaginal examination break a woman's fast? Would an invasive vaginal examination break a woman's fast? So how do you determine the answer to this question? You go back to the segment of text that deals with what breaks the fast, right? What breaks the fast? And in what breaks the fast, you will see there are rules. Al-iftar fi Ramadan, arba'atu anwa. There are 4 types of breaking the fast in Ramadan. There are slides that deal specifically with what exactly breaks the fast. And it is for you to now examine these points and see, okay, so where does a vaginal examination fit into, and does this break the fast? So you can see it's listed here. You have to figure out in which category does this fit into exactly. To end off the dars, as a quick summary, when you receive a question like this, would an invasive vaginal examination break a woman's fast? Always take it back to its integrals and conditions. You ask yourself, what are the conditions for a valid fast, right? Or what breaks the fast? And if you learn what breaks the fast, if it's part of that, then fine. So in this particular question, just to give you a sort of a framework, in the Shafi'i school, any substance that reaches the body cavity from an open orifice, an open passageway, it reaches the upper torso cavity or the head cavity, and it's done deliberately, intentionally, not forgetfully, that would break the fast. So the vaginal examination, is that inside the body cavity? Of course. Is it from an open passageway? Of course. Is something going inside that open passageway into the body cavity for the vaginal examination? Yes, right? So would this break the fast? Yes, it would break the fast, because it's exactly according to the definition of what breaks the fast in the Shafi'i school. So Jazakumullahu khairan, that's the end of the discussion on fasting. The next lesson will start covering the Hajj and Umrah. It's not technically part of the kitab, but since it is part of ibadat, we might as well cover the basics, the very fundamental rules or integrals and conditions for Hajj and Umrah, and then complete the course on that note, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. If I'm not mistaken, there is either going to be 1 or 2 lessons remaining. But for now, that's the end of lesson number 21. Jazakumullahu khairan. Until next time, wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad, subhanallahi wa bihamdih, subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik, nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.
La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah.